Hello everyone, good afternoon from Chile, Nairobi. My name is Tim Daguri Moirore. I work with Co-Creation Hub, that is a member of AIRA, and I also happen to be a member of the oversight group. So just to introduce AIRA, AIRA is an alliance of 10 civil society organizations that work on digital rights and internet freedoms on the African continent. For us, we envision an Africa where digital rights are upheld in all aspects of life, governance, and the economy. So ensuring equity and prosperity across the continent. So today, before I jump into that, actually, let me maybe just ask that the AIRA video is played.
Just be a minute.
All right.
Let me just check.
All right. But even as we wait, I was just going to talk a little about what AIRA talks and what we envision for this platform. So it's really an opportunity for, okay, there we go.
In October 2020, 9 African organizations across the continent came together. We stand for accountability, inclusion, equity, and digital rights for all on the African continent. The African Internet Rights Alliance collectively works to address the inequalities and challenges we face online that are also reflected offline, as the internet and technology become more and more integrated into the lives of Africans. We face new challenges to our human rights in the digital context, including unequal access, internet shutdowns and restrictions, and violence online. Join us in the movement to advance inclusive and equitable digital rights for all on the African continent.
Thank you. So that's who we are as AIRA. And again, thank you for joining us and welcome for those who keep coming in. So this is the 5th AIRA Talks, and this really is a platform opportunity for policymakers, civil society leaders, representatives of various organizations and individuals interested in advancing digital rights on the continent, particularly, to regularly convene, share experiences, and learnings with the aim of enhancing collaboration and impact. So again, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us from wherever you are. I'm going to hand over now to our OG's representative, who also happens to be our moderator for today, Devon Turner. Devon works with the Legal Resources Center in Southern Africa. Devon, over to you.
Good afternoon, all. As was noted, this is the 5th AIRA Talks of the year, and of which we will hold 2 more for the rest of the year as well. You can find previous AIRA Talks on our website and YouTube channel, the details of which are provided in the chat. I also want to confirm before we begin that this session is being recorded and that we welcome and encourage your coverage of digital rights and even of our conversation that we will in fact have today. If you have any follow-up questions or specific topics that you'd like to explore in more depth, please follow up with Ashna, who is in the AIRA coordinating organization, or Ashnat, who is working in the AIRA support as well. The details for them are also provided within the chat. In addition, I also invite you to find and follow AIRA on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and to visit our website, which is found at AIRA, AIRA.Africa, and our YouTube channel, AIRA Digital Rights, to learn more about our work as an alliance. The links to these also will be provided within the chat below. Following on this now, we will move on to our first session, which is our discussion with the panelists in the first session today. Kenya is one of the countries in Africa with a fast-paced advancement of digital technologies. This digital advancement has resulted in widespread use of digital platforms and social media. This provides opportunities to disseminate information and raise civic consciousness and engagement, which is then leveraged by politicians, government agencies, NGOs, and other stakeholders in the run-up to the upcoming elections. Worryingly, however, this increased access and engagement also comes with new challenges in protecting human rights and democracy, with the August elections, of course, being at the heart of this. With this in mind, then, we have to then re-echo the importance of the discussion on protecting digital rights during elections. The panelists in this discussion have significant experience in this and will, in addition to sharing information, stimulate reflections and discussions by raising key questions and issues which can then be dealt with further discussion. Now, let's go to our panelists and discussants. I will ask our panelists that they turn on their video feeds as they are introduced and that they then keep on their video feeds for the rest of the session. Our panelists for the session now are Victor Capillo from Kicternet. Check. Catherine Muya from Article 19 Eastern Africa, Angeline Warigi from CPIT, and finally Nelly Mwapu from Amnesty International Africa, Amnesty International Kenya, I should say. Okay, and then now as we begin the discussions, I have the pleasure of introducing our first panel discussion, which is Victor Capillo from Kicternet. Victor will give us a presentation on key issues related to data protection and privacy in the upcoming Kenyan elections. Victor, you have your 10 minutes now.
All right, thank you very much, Devon, for the introduction. And again, thank you, my colleagues and the panelists, and also the audience who are present. I just want to highlight the fact that, maybe just to give an introduction, that Kicternet is local think tank that focuses on ICT policy and research, advocacy and capacity building, and works within Kenya and also across the region to advance, best practice in terms of ICT policy making and laws. And we have been observing the election environment in Kenya and also conducting research on digital rights issues. And I think with respect to the election, aspects that we'd like to highlight to colleagues relating to how prepared, or some of the issues that have arisen in the country that would be important to keep an eye on. I think first to highlight is that Kenya adopted a data protection law in 2019, and subsequently a data protection commission was appointed a year later. And so far the office has been established, and I think that is very progressive, at least to have a data protection oversight institution that is charged with the responsibility of monitoring and investigating and ensuring that privacy rights are respected. And following the Act, we have had a number of regulations which have been developed on the registration of data collectors and processors, around enforcement, and also others relating to the operations of the Act. So we can see that with respect to a legal environment, we have made progress, at least in the past 2 years, to have quite robust regulations and also a number of guidance notes that have been developed by the data commissioner. And it is also important to mention that one of the guidance notes has been on elections, and it provides some guidance to political parties and the election management body in terms of what standard they are expected of in terms of compliance. Previously, we have had challenges during election period with respect to how user or data subjects information has been handled or breached or by various actors in the political environment. One of the key aspects has been, for example, on spam messaging. Quite a number of reports we have noted around individuals receiving messages from politicians and other people who are campaigning during the nomination stages, and also even now during the campaign period. So we're still seeing cases of unsolicited text messages being sent to people, and it means that their telephone contacts are obtained from somewhere, and I think we're yet to find why and how politicians are accessing individual contacts and targeting them with messages. And again, the same targeting has seen on social media, where some political parties, especially during the last election, were able to use targeted ads. I know we are aware of the Cambridge Analytica, where personal data was used to profile users who are supporting different political sides, and this was particularly problematic, and we did raise these concerns with the various platforms, and it is good to mention that today, at least, Meta has reported that they've tried to put a lid on political targeted messages through all their platforms, and also indicated that they are going to be more transparent around showing how and who is targeting voters using their platforms. Another key concern has been in terms of for the election management body. We had a voter registration earlier in the year and also towards the end of last year, and there were concerns about how the body is prepared to comply with the data protection laws, considering that key aspects such as the consent, there were issues around the security of the register, information that is presented in the register, who has access to it, how secure is it based locally or not? And of course, the Commission has so far indicated that it has conducted a data protection impact assessment, and they are now hosting the data locally, and the concerns around the third-party providers who were having access to the data is limited now to once they supply the products, then they hand over and the information is within the control of the Commission. However, we still don't have ways of independently verifying this, but that is what the Commission has said. There were also challenges around registration of voters in different political parties early in the year, where you would wake up one day and find your name in the register of a different political party other than that on which you provided, which also showed that there probably was a time when political parties were, getting data subject information from other sources that are not legitimate and using them to register them in the parties. For those who are not in Kenya, the political parties are required to submit the names of members who support them. And even more recently, there were concerns over whether party aspirants who are submitting their names for registration as candidates were required to submit the copies of national IDs to the Election Commission. So we are seeing that when it comes to registration of voters in political parties and also in the presentation of candidates' data to the Commission, a lot of personal data is being transacted and some of it is not legitimately acquired with the consent of the data subject. So that still presents a challenge for data protection in the country, given that the consent of data subjects is not properly obtained. And of course, we welcome the fact that there is a portal where users can independently verify their registration status, which is good, and also that the IEBC has also provided a mechanism for voters to check their registration status. Initially, or rather during the last election, we had a challenge with the portals because it meant the way they had been designed meant that any person could check the registration details of any registered voter, or even go to the commission and buy the entire register from the commission and access this information. But this time around, they've tried to make the changes and put in a two-step authentication mechanism so that you have to have more information to query the registration details of any voter. I think other concerns that we have noted is, with respect to just the role of the ODPC, whereas, it is still a new office and doesn't necessarily have all the, the capacity given the number of staff that it has, in as much as there has been recruitment that has been conducted by the Commission. We are expecting that the Commission will be able to crack the whip on these abuses of personal data in the country, and to regulate more stringently the abuse by different stakeholders of voters' data, and especially when it comes to time for, providing redress to complaints that have been made. There are still challenges in terms of the time it takes between lodging a complaint to getting redress from the Commission or even feedback. So there's still a bit of a capacity issue there that, justice delayed is just denied. And if we don't have a Commission that is responsive and has the capacity to respond quickly whenever complaints are raised, when there are breaches, then there's going to be a challenge. The other would be in terms of its capacity to report and to be transparent in terms of what complaints has it received and what is the number that it has processed, so that we can also, as stakeholders and researchers, assess how fast, how responsive, how many people are making complaints. There is a study which was done by Amnesty, which showed that the level of awareness of privacy rights is still very low in the country, which means that it could pose a challenge when it comes to reporting, because if members of the public are not aware of the data rights or privacy rights for that matter, then it means the reporting will also be low. So we still have a challenge in terms of the awareness, general awareness of members of the public on their privacy rights, and therefore it affects the ability to respond or complain, or even to be aware of just where to report those breaches. And I think as I conclude, just to highlight that again, the responsibility of various platforms right now, quite a significant population has gone online. We are working online. We are doing campaigns online on social media, and of course the aspect of the responsibility of intermediaries, whether they are ISPs, whether they are mobile money users, whether they are controllers or security in buildings, that whenever data is collected, are we able to ensure that it is secure from cyber attacks, and also from misuse, especially from unauthorized access. Just recently, we saw in the media reports that there was incident of, a hacking incident where somebody breached, IBC servers and accessed, personal information of a couple of thousands of voters. So this security, IT security concerns still remain, because if we have weak cyber defenses, then it means that in as much as we could be safeguarding people's privacy by respecting even the rights of data subjects and collecting the data in the right way, but if we can't secure that information once it has been collected, then it means we still have a challenge, especially in the era of rising cyber threats that has been witnessed in the country. So I'd like to stop there for now, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victor. I just note for everyone watching as well, we will have a Q&A session afterwards where we can then pose questions to Victor as well. I just want to shortly make a correction. Our third panelist will be Francis Monyango from CPIT, not Angeline, as I noted earlier. And now we will then move on to Catherine Muya from Article 19. So I have the pleasure of introducing Catherine as the next discussant. Catherine will present on the key issues related to misinformation and disinformation on the digital rights side. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Devon. So my name is Catherine Moya, and I work as the Program Officer for Digital Rights and Policy at Article 19, Eastern Africa. Article 19 is an international NGO that promotes free expression and access to information worldwide. So within the Kenyan context, we are coming from a previous election in 2017 where there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation, much to what my colleague Victor had mentioned regarding Cambridge Analytica and other companies that had worked in Kenya and on Kenya's social media space to promote disinformation. So that's where we're coming from within that context. And then throughout the year, throughout the 5-year period between that election in 2017 and the 2022 elections, we have produced research from Article 19, from Gektanet, from various other organizations like Mozilla that have documented the use of paid influencers, misinformation, paid misinformation and disinformation drivers within the Kenyan digital space. And that's the background with which we're going into this election. So over the past year, in terms of elections and electioneering, political parties and representatives of political parties have come out to have to note the importance of digital spaces within their campaigns. And so what they've done is the leading parties have appointed digital strategists that help them in coaching their digital campaigns and digital, and they have been interviewed on TV. They were recently interviewed by Nation Media Group, where they gave out their perspectives and opinions on why the digital space is really important, especially in terms of reaching young demographic of voters. And so what we're seeing as trends with misinformation and disinformation in the Kenyan digital space, there are about 5 to 6 trends. So I'll start with the first being opinion polls. So in this election, there has been at least more than three opinion polls that have been released by various organizations, credible organizations that actually do the polling. And so what we can see on Kenyan spaces is mostly an emergence of fake polls, an emergence of accounts that impersonate this pollsters and then again go ahead to produce fake polls so as to confuse other people or to sway people to move towards a political party inclining that they have more following. So that's just one. The second is the impersonation of media accounts and impersonation of accounts of personalities and different people. And so this is used again to amplify the misinformation and disinformation that's created. So for example, if you create a fake poll, you then also again create or impersonate a media house so that it looks like it's been shared by that media house. And then again, also try and pass misinformation from that impersonated account, because people, in as much as social media is, so that there was a report last year by Internews Kenya that said social media is where Kenyans go to most to find out what's trending and what's current, but it's not the most credible source of news. So we still, the report still identified media houses like normal media houses like NTV, big media houses, as the most credible source of information. So again, impersonating this account then gives and promotes that it sort of is supposed to give credibility to misinformation and disinformation, which is obviously false. Then the third that we're seeing is, of course, the use of hidden language, and this might not necessarily be related to misinformation and disinformation, but might also be speech speech that's posted online with the intent to incite violence. So it then comes out with hidden or coded words. So for example, hidden words may be use of things that you would only understand if you have local context of living in Kenya. So for example, use of words or slurs that come, ethnic slurs, for example, has been one of the ways in which the use of ethnic slurs online has been used to promote content that incites people to violence. Although the reach of that has not probably been, we have not seen offline violence being as much as we normally see that in elections. But then again, the use of those words to sort of just get people to think this way has still been used and has been documented. So it's things that you could understand if you come from maybe my community, for example, or things like that. Then one of the other things that we're seeing as well is false translations or false captions. So you would, for example, we recently had a case where you would see maybe a presidential aspirant goes on national TV or is saying something, and the caption is something either inciting or the caption that's translating it is false, especially where the person speaking is actually not speaking in like English or Swahili, and they're speaking in some other different language. And so you would see a lot of these videos with false translations and things like that. And then I think in terms of misinformation and disinformation, another tool that we're seeing is, again, where is it? Sorry, I forgot. But so it's using of history or revising of history, basically just bringing back events that happened historically, either relating to certain candidates or relating to politicians affiliated with that party, sort of just bringing out what people had done before, and then now bringing it in a way that's in a context that is intended to incite others, or in a content that's intended to reduce the credibility of that particular candidate. So that might not be necessarily false, but it's just in the way that it's presented. And then also the use of satire and humor. This might not actually be because different platforms regulate satire and humor very differently. And so, for example, when we had a session with Facebook, they mentioned that for them, if it's misinformation that's related to satire, is not necessarily taken down and might remain. So in that context, there is that sort of information ends up staying online, mostly because it might not violate platforms' rules as they stand. But then again, it's just, a humorous way of comparing things or people and stuff. It might not necessarily be false, but it's also something that may or may not cause, it maybe not will reach the threshold of incitement violence, but it's just maybe on its way there. And then finally, it's also understanding how different platforms work and trying to use the platform algorithms against the platform itself. So for example, if it's Twitter, it's understanding how that Twitter algorithm works. And you could see maybe funny things like people being paid to trend a hashtag, not necessarily that. Of course, there have been documented cases where people in Kenya have been paid and disinformation influencers have been paid. But then again, there is just this trending of hashtags, and there are so many hashtags. I think in one day, at least one political hashtag, at least the past 3 months, you must have at least one political hashtag every day. And so for Twitter, for example, and so that's something that has been used to amplify sort of narratives. And when a hashtag is trending, for example, either side will come onto the hashtag to try and put in their own messaging that will try and disparage the other side. So it's also sometimes using that hashtag, depending on whoever started it, to just, counter the messages that are being given by the other people or the other faction. Mostly because sometimes they're targeted towards something or things like that. So yeah, that's mostly what you see on digital platforms. There have been on platforms like TikTok, there have been investigations recently that show how the platform is being used to amplify misinformation, and mostly it's just content that cannot be moderated or has not been moderated, because of maybe failing to understand local context or things like this. And so this might include misinformation in terms of video evidence. So you would see, for example, a fake video or a fake TikTok made with representing or impersonating like news sites like BBC and stuff like that, just trying to make this content look real, or trying to say a political party said something, or giving endorsements to political organizations that are not actually true or did not actually happen. And that's just something that we've documented, just saying somebody endorsed something and that didn't actually happen. Or just content that is supposed to be flagged and taken down but has not been taken down as of yet. So I know we'll get an opportunity later to say what Article 19 has been doing about this, but generally that's just the picture about it.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Yeah, I think it's quite startling that the increase in social media platforms and the explosion of these social media platforms have created new enemies to the integrity of these spaces. But we will move on later as well with the Q&As. I move on to our next panelist, who, as I noted, is Francis Munyango from CPIT. Francis will give us a presentation on the initial findings that they've made from a study on the use of micro-targeting on social media platforms in the spread of misinformation and disinformation. Francis, I turn to you for your 10-minute presentation then.
Thank you very much. I will present about, now whatever I'm about to present on is on micro-targeting in the Kenyan elections. However, my disclaimer is that it's still work in progress. So thank you for that. Can go to the first slide on introduction. So, of course, with the increased digital tools or the increased digitization of the world, people are online for various reasons, either emailing, interactions, business, trade, social reasons. Every time they log in, they leave digital footprints, a piece of themselves online. And for political parties across the world, as research has shown us, this provides them with an opportunity to be able to analyze and know the electorate, and also to reach out to them through a process which we refer to as micro-targeting. So micro-targeting is a multi-step process that involves collection of data to analyze with the aim of understanding people's behavior and opinions. It is followed by categorizing individuals based on their perceived inclinations, such as similar concerns, opinions over matters. And then after that, the next step is to use predictive modeling that matches an individual's personal characteristics with their political beliefs so as to produce a desired voting decision from that individual. And then now, once that analysis has been done, political messages are tailored to and disseminated to the targets that have been identified. And this has grown in scale because of two reasons: because of the emergence of social media as a communication channel, and the existence of big data. So because of social media, people will engage in platforms which are relevant to their interest. So it will be, with time, you get to know the people who are interested in football, you'll find them in this page. The people interested in politics, you'll find them here. And from there, you can be able to sift through the individuals and know, okay, which people are outspoken about this, or if somebody has liked a certain page and has been commenting, then they're definitely interested in something in that particular issue. And it also takes us to behavioral advertising, which involves tracking people's behavior online and using the information to display individual targeted advertisements. That one is, I think we have all seen that when going to websites where you probably searched for shoes early in the week, and the rest of the week, all the ads that you see are just about shoes and different types of shoes and shoe stores around your locality. And now, online political micro-targeting can be used in two ways: in identifying voters that are likely to vote a certain way, and then it also helps political parties and strategists to package their messaging in a certain way so as to get new voters. Next slide, please. So I will run through the Cambridge Analytica issue. The most famous example of political micro-targeting, and they deployed a psychological profiling based on social media data that they collected. And in 2013, they had a big 5 personality test which they circulated and people used. And from that, they were able to collect data which they profiled and were able to use for political micro-targeting in different countries such as the US during the during the Brexit campaign and also in Kenya during the last two Kenyan elections. Next one, please. So in the year 2017, CPIT was conducting research on the privacy of biometric technology. And in the process, they discovered that 99% of the individuals that they had surveyed had received targeted and unsolicited political messages via SMS from political candidates. What was unique about these messages was that it was personalized. It included people's names, their exact polling stations, and exact constituency, which led us to believe that there was a high likelihood that some individuals had access to the voter register, and that's how political actors who engaged in unsolicited political messaging were able to target individual constituents or potential voters within the areas in which they were vying. Next, please. Now, one may wonder, what's the risk? The biggest risk actually from the point in which we are researching right now is on the aspects of privacy, but there's aspect of invasion of privacy, where your personal information, which is entrusted by a certain data controller or processor, is being used for other purposes that it was not. It's a breach of purpose limitation and lack of notification as well. The other risk is data breaches. Most of the time we find that for this to happen, it's because of a data breach of some sort, where probably a rogue actor decided to sell the data or to give access to political actors who are not supposed to actually have access to this information. Next one. And it also goes to misuse, because now, because of the principle of purpose limitation, you find that data was collected for a particular purpose, but it's being used for others. And then there's an aspect of manipulation of voters, because now you've been profiled, and I'm about to talk about profiling in the next few. There's let me call it dishonesty, because you are now profiled and manipulated to vote a certain way. And then it also leads to voter exclusion. Next slide, please. So profiling, according to the Data Protection Act, means any form of automated processing of personal data consisting of use of personal data to evaluate certain personal aspects relating to a natural person. And it's especially to analyze and predict aspects concerning all that. I've highlighted ethnic, social origin, religion, belief, culture, language, personal preferences, interests, behavior, location, and movements. These are very key for political actors engaging in any form of profiling for purposes of micro-targeting in messaging. Next one. So the Kenya Data Protection Act has provisions on automated decision making, and it states that data subjects have a right not to be subjected to decisions solely on automated processing, including profiling, which provides legal effects concerning or which affects them. This one does not apply where it's necessary for entry of a contract, authorized by a law, or an individual has given consent. Most of the time when people's personal information has been used and profiled, and been profiled, you find that there was no consent. It hasn't been authorized by any law, and it wasn't even necessary for any contract. Next. I'll make reference to what the Article 29 Working Party wrote in 2017 when they were working on the guidelines on profiling and automated decision-making under the then forthcoming GDPR. They want that profiling and automated decision-making technologies can pose a significant risk for individuals' rights and freedoms, and can perpetuate existing stereotypes and social segregation absent of appropriate safeguards. What you see with micro-targeting is that, for example, in especially like in a country like Kenya, where we can say ethnic community A and B, a candidate who wants to marshal up numbers from his ethnic community will profile people according to their names and also perpetuate, and it brings now this aspect of stereotypes and segregation, where now messaging will only go for people who are from his community or the target community, because he feels like they are the ones who are more receptive to his messaging and his manifesto. Next. The next part of the law that is relevant is on the commercial use of data. This one has to be done under, it's prohibited according to Section 37 of the Data Protection Act. However, the exemptions are there that there has to be consent and or the use is authorized under any written law and the data subject has been informed. The Data Protection General Regulations in particular expand further and emphasize on the opt-out mechanism and to be used. So it's important to note that these two laws, the Act and the regulations, do not mention anything about political messaging, but that is a common use of digital media in Kenya. Next. So basically, from our research, you can see the law in as far as profiling is, because now for micro-targeting to take place, it involves access to personal information, profiling it and categorizing it in different ways. And then after that, engaging in now unsolicited messaging, which the law prohibits unless one is subscribed to, or it's against to, or is according to the law. But for most political actors, you find that they will engage with this and they do not meet any of those requirements, and it's against the law. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much, Francis. I think that this sometimes points to, or micro-targeting points to what sometimes can be the most frightening of these data breaches, is the fact that propaganda can now be specifically tailored to individuals. And I think everyone's engagement on the chat as well showed to the issues and how deeply frightening this can be. And as someone noted in the chat as well, the fact that you receive extremely personal type of information that tries to influence you, and it shows the scary, thought that can be used in any way so possible and so personalized. But thank you very much. Finally, we move on to our next panelist, our last panelist. I have the pleasure of introducing Nelly Mapu from Amnesty International Kenya. Nelly will give us a discussion on the status of civic space rights, freedom of expression, and efforts to protect democracy in the run-up to the Kenyan elections. Nelly, it's over to you.
Great. Greetings, everyone. My name is Nelly Mapu, and I am a Digital Rights Campaign Officer at Amnesty International Kenya. And Amnesty International is a global movement of more than 10 million people in over 150 countries and territories who campaign to end abuses on human rights all over. For more than 50 years, it has been a force of change through democratization, letter writing, campaigns, awareness initiatives, vigils, and more. We tend to campaign in different ways to ensure that we're protecting the freedom of the citizens of the countries that we're in. The organization has been through a major transformation and has adapted to dramatic changes in the world, which has caused it to shift from one large London-based opened regional offices in Africa, Asia, Pacific, Central and East African and East Europe, Latin American, and in the Middle East. So Amnesty International works in tandem with the International Office and we aim to end grave abuses and injustices inflicted on people every day by advancing equality, freedom, and citizenship. Guided by our strategic framework for 2021 and 2023, Amnesty International Kenya exists to enable circles of conscience and movements capable of advancing full citizenship rights for all and effect accountability within states. So getting into the discussion of the civic spaces. So a civic space is created by a set of universally accepted rules which allow people to organize, participate, and communicate with each other freely without hindrance. And in doing so, they can influence political, social, and economical structures around them. So in particular, civic spaces allow individuals and groups to contribute to policy making that affects their lives by accessing information, engaging in dialogue, expressing dissent or disagreement, and joining together to express their views. So Article 10 of the Human Rights Charter affirms the right to freedom of expression. And the Constitution of Kenya, the 2010 Constitution under Article 33 guarantees the freedom of expression, while Article 33 of the Constitution guarantees the freedom of association. It states that every person has the right to freedom of association, which includes the right to form, join, participate in the activities of an association of any kind. Over the last few decades, we've witnessed a shift into digital civic spaces, which has created the need to educate communities and movements on online digital aspects, such as digital rights, data protection, privacy, circumvention, and how to fully utilize the digital space in general. So Amnesty International Kenya, in its efforts to protect democracy through the run-up to the Kenyan election, has been conducting a few activities. So we have been holding local discussions referred to as Chambua Uongozi. This was a platform where community members could analyze leadership and take ownership of the process, the processes leading up to the election, so that they may be able to question and make informed decisions on who they're going to place within who they're going to place as leaders in the upcoming elections. We also recently released a scorecard on the previous administration, the Jubilee administration, and it spoke about human rights. It was a Jubilee scorecard that evaluated the progress made by the Jubilee administration on human rights across 5 critical areas: the right to health, adequate housing, food, the civil space, freedoms, and liberty, as well as security of the person. After the evaluation, the sub-themes under each area, the administration scored only 46%, which indicated that there was still a lot, that could have been done. The full document is on our website, and there's an executive summary as well, in case any of the participants would like to have a review of the scorecard in more detail. We've also been partnering in the gubernatorial and presidential debates, which I saw someone in the chat comment that they message on the gubernatorial debates. I'd like to assure you that has nothing to do with Amnesty. But yes, we have been partnering to ensure that, to ensure that the debates are taking place so that the citizens in Kenya are able to understand what the leaders are bringing to the table. We have been conducting perception surveys. These happen every 2 weeks in communities, in counties where we felt that, there may be undertones of slight, either incitement or violence. After we conducted a risk analysis, we selected these counties and are now conducting perception surveys on a 2-week basis, just to be able to ensure that we are aware of the trends and that we can be able to share this information with our partners and ensure that we're having a peaceful election this coming August. We also have digital disruptors. So this is a group of 10 individuals that we are influencers within the social media space. And what they're doing is that they're pinpointing things on the online spaces, for instance, on WhatsApp or in Facebook or Twitter, just highlighting the trends so that we're able to respond and counter any hate speech or disinformation or misinformation that is taking place within online spaces. We are also working with a few of the big tech companies just as trusted partners so that we're able to flag any sort of words that would create any tension or result in any form of violence. So we're in a group with some organizations where we send out any works that we would like these big tech companies to flag within their platforms for review so that they're able to take down certain posts more effectively, since we're the ones who understand the context in which these words are, provoking incitement. We also have been holding book clubs. It's more, we've been having books. We've been reading, normally we have book clubs throughout the year, but intentionally during this time, we have been focusing on book clubs and books that are mostly talking about elections and kind of creating the discussion with the communities through the book clubs about election processes via the books that we're reading as we move forward, as we get closer to the election period. We're also having strategic partnerships with organizations who could complement the work that we're doing within the online space and even personally on the ground. So for instance, we have a partnership with African Voices, who are, monitoring police. The police, they have a trusted partnership with the police, and they are monitoring any, sort of violence that might occur from that end. And yes, we also have our regular training forums, just speaking to community members on their digital safety during this time of elections, as well as general safety and well-being, just trying to push the aspect of having a very peaceful election. Yeah, that is what we've been doing towards this efforts.
Thank you very much, Nelly. Very interesting work indeed. Especially navigating that space can be quite a difficult space to navigate. But thank you so much. We will move on now, and thank you so much to the panelists for the panel discussion session. We'll move on then from that session into the next session, which covers questions posed to the panel from our sides. So it's a question and answer session for the panelists themselves. I have a series of questions that I'll be asking our panelists, after which I will leave 10 minutes after this session for additional questions and queries from the audience here in the session today. In the meanwhile, while these questions are being posed from my side, I ask any of the discussants to please drop any questions they may have into the chat so that we can compile them for our panelists in the 10-minute session after this one. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to the first question that I have for Victor. And Victor, the first question is what has been the responses of the Data Commissioner and other government agencies to the work that you've been doing? And how have they been engaged in protecting digital rights in Kenya at the moment?
Thank you very much, Devon. I think the Data Commissioner's Office has been quite responsive since its establishment. I think if there's an example of an agency that has been open and responsive to the views of the public and also insights into how it could do its job better, I think we need to commend the institution. But at the same time, we have to note that their challenge really has been the capacity issue, because in the past 3 years, we've had quite, widespread interest on privacy matters across the globe, not just in Kenya. And many people want to know what my rights, what are they, where do they start? And so when you have an agency which is willing to engage with stakeholders and also to share information with the public, but its activities are hampered by staff capacity or financial resourcing, then it's a problem. But I mean, we also appreciate the various organizations and donor organizations, development partners that have come in to support to build the capacity of the institution to enable it to discharge its mandate. Of course, noting that even as the commission is active, we've had other government agencies. We just had a voter registration process ongoing by another independent commission. We had the Huduma number, which was highly contested. I mean, still contested to date, which captured data of 37 million Kenyans without a legal framework. And I remember when we went to meet with the Parliament Assembly, the Data Commissioner was also present to strongly make its position about the process and why it needs to comply with the law. So, and also Parliament was quite responsive in and the ministry in terms of developing the legislation. For the first time, I think in many years in Kenya, we had 2 bills proposed on privacy by both houses of parliament, which shows that both were quite interested in regulating privacy and ensuring a proper framework. Of course, we thank the makers of the constitution because we had a right to privacy entrenched there, and so parliament could only do its job of making legislation. But you see this interest by various institutions. The ministry has developed the regulations, 3 regulations in record time, and they are now implemented. So I think the institutions are aware there is interest to regulate, there's interest from members of the public, and I think there's still room for engagement, especially when it comes to enforcement and implementation of the policies and the laws, because that is where our biggest problem usually lies as a country. The documents are fantastic, but implementation and redress will be key, especially looking at how the courts will be ready to respond to matters brought to them about privacy violations. We've seen so far with the Huduma number cases that the courts have attempted to make some progress, but I think they still need for capacity on that side to ensure that the laws are properly enforced and the data subject can enjoy their rights without continuing violations. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah, I think that points to a deeper problem as well. I mean, I think it's an African problem as well, where policies are in place and legislation is in place, but sometimes we struggle with implementation. But this is already a difficult space because of the proliferation of these incursions within the digital space. It's even difficult for them to navigate in terms of the resources for governments themselves. My next question that I'm moving on to is to Catherine. Catherine, you noted that Article 19 has also been working with human rights defenders. Can you please explain some of the issues that human rights defenders are dealing with and any unique challenges that they face online?
Well, Article 19 works both online and offline. So in the context of elections, again, where we're coming from is from a situation where in the last election, human rights defenders or organizations that were attempting to maybe stand up for human rights and accountability and justice during the election period were actually threatened at some point with deregistration. So you had like KHRC and other different organizations. And so that also, although it happens offline, it obviously affects the ability of these organizations to organize online in the context, especially around elections. So organizations that come out to call out human rights abuses and things like this are, of course, at risk at this time. The failure by the government, the previous government, to operationalize legislation like the Public Benefits Organization Act, the PBO Act, that was intended to give civil society organizations more robustness in terms of a legal framework, in terms of securing their registration and the process of deregistration is enacted but has not come into force yet. So organizations are still governed by the NGO Act, which again is open to abuse in situations such as this and in critical times such as this, where there are very vested interest and different interest among different people. But I think individually, as human rights defenders, of course, they're also facing the issues of online safety. The human rights defenders that we've worked with are again not only human rights defenders, because Article 19 also works for the safety of journalists, right? And journalists have been very instrumental at reporting during this critical time, giving us news. And of course, they can be subject to trolls. They can be subject to issues that affect online safety, basically. The journalists that have to go on the ground to sort of and to report to us, and they have to be very aware of their own security, aware of the things that they are reporting about, aware of their own environments. Party organizations, for example, in our country get colors, so when they're reporting, they have to be very also aware of their surrounding. Even their dressing is sometimes restricted. So from an offline environment and both from an online environment, there are issues around security. So online, it's especially for women or for women human rights defenders, it's how are they then also able to speak out against these issues online? Politics in Kenya are very emotive. And it's, of course, everyone has an opinion, and we work for the right for everyone to have an opinion. But then again, if you're standing up for something online again, or even if you're questioning things, there is an ability for it to be associated with you, or even to move on beyond you. And as Francis was talking about, to just profile you as a person. Human rights defenders in the online environment have had at times Wikipedia pages made for them and edited, or if they have a Wikipedia page that's edited out. And of course, it's a way of harassment and abuse, especially for, let's say, like women human rights defenders. And so in the context of election again, there's of course issues around protest. Recently we saw a peaceful protest, actually, where people were able, in the Sabasabute, which is a really historical moment for Kenya. So it was a historical day of protest, and so we saw peaceful protest where they were allowed to protest, and Article 19 was supporting this protest and everything else, and documenting what happened, and at least it was violence free, and law enforcement did not go beyond their mandate. But that's also the use of force during elections is something that we have seen before. Also, in the unlikely and unfortunate event of violence, sometimes externally you have issues of electoral sexual related violence, but we hope that that will not happen this time. It doesn't look like it's going to happen, but we have to wait until the day of the election and the election results coming out. So, but I think the issues around security and safety, especially as they question some of these things, even as they represent an online safety, is a really big concern. And I when we get to answering questions, Article 19 also works with platforms and has been working with some. So I would also maybe answer Alexandra's question at the time.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Yeah, I think it comes into that difficult space, especially for human rights defenders, of freedom of expression, but censorship that happens as well. But then obviously not having a free for all as well, which then allows for hackers and outside influences then to influence these media platforms in favor of governments and political parties. I think, as you were mentioning now, I think we can segue into the question that Alexandra actually posted and open it to the group as well to speak on. So the question that was posted by Alexandra is on engaging with social media companies. Oh, Alexandra, you switched on your camera. Do you mind if I'll just ask them, or is that okay? Yeah, so it was a question for the panelists, and anyone can answer. For those who have engaged with social media companies, how engaged have the social media companies been with your organization on the risks their platforms are posing to election integrity in Kenya? And have there been specific safeguards put into place? Is there transparency on how much capacity the companies have to moderate content and enforce their safeguard policies? I think whoever wants to chip in can, but I do know that I think Catherine as well has been working on this as well. So maybe you can answer then to that question.
So we have engaged different platforms ahead of the elections, and maybe my other colleagues will speak to this as well. But we so for different platforms, so there are platforms like Meta that have been keen to educate civil society organizations on how their content moderation policies actually work, and sort of promote that understanding on what is considered, how they treat misinformation, disinformation, and work with civil society organizations to build certain lexicons on harmful words around the elections and different things like this. So I know that we help them build lexicons on what we are seeing as troubled or problematic things to look out for. Also helping them to see or understand different things and just provide different context around the elections. So that's for platforms like Meta. For platforms like TikTok, and we did work with them collaboratively to just have them come in and address different stakeholders on what they're doing around the election, inform stakeholders as well around their content moderation policies, highlighting also the challenges that they have, especially because it's a video platform, and the content moderation around that would also need, in as much as they have policies, there would also need to be a little bit more transparency around how they're enforcing it, and also the capacity in which they have. So that I could say is probably there is need for improvement around that area in terms of transparency and even accountability. But in terms of engagement, I think that for those two platforms that I have mentioned, at least I know there has been a deliberate effort to approach civil society organizations on the ground and sort of and engage with them, although that could be improved and it could be continued, and not only within the context of election. So for example, today Meta released some of the information and things that they've been doing around electoral transparency. We welcome that, but we also still see need for them to, maybe if they're providing country desegregated data, then maybe they should continue doing that beyond the context of the election and for broader things, not only misinformation or hate speech related things. But if you can give us the data in Kenya, then you might as well just go ahead and give us, information about sexual violence or sexual harassment and things like this, so that even as civil society organizations, we're then able to know what to focus on in terms of engagement and advocacy. But I would say there has been some actions from platforms, but it should be consistent and improved.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think the next question also that just segues well into that I want to pose to Francis. Francis, I just want to pose to you, from your research that you've done on the micro-targeting, are there any examples of initiatives that have been able to counter the micro-targeting which has caused the misinformation and disinformation surrounding the elections?
Thank you very much for that question. What we have observed so far, let's say, was judicial action against Cambridge Analytica and executives. There hasn't been any other initiative like in this region against that. However, maybe we can consider the enactment of the Data Protection Act in 2019 as a step in the right direction towards dealing with that, because it pretty much prohibits that entire sequence of activities from collection without consent, or even if collection was rightfully done, the misuse and the misuse of the personal information, the targeted marketing without consent, the profiling, all that is prohibited under the law. So what we can say is remaining is just the hoping that now that our data protection authority, the ODPC, will now get into action and actually hold some groups or parties into account for the engaging in unsolicited political messaging, some of which is, we can say, is micro-targeted because of the candidate and the recipient. Other than that, initiatives that I can also laud include fact checkers, because now they help deal with the misinformation that comes through this micro-targeting message communications to voters or potential voters. Fact-checking organizations such as AFP Kenya, Pesa Check, Africa Check, and the Media Council of Kenya have really been working on dealing with misinformation. And in particular, I can mention Media Council of Kenya, which partnered with Africa Check to train journalists. And they even launched a platform called iVerify. So that's one thing that is happening in Kenya that can help people dealing with misinformation. There's a law in the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act. There's a provision that prohibits spreading of, let me call it, fake news. It depends on how you read the law. However, I must acknowledge that also that provision is very problematic, because it also limits the freedom of expression to ways which can be considered beyond the constitutional threshold. So there's that. I don't think anyone has been successfully been charged with it yet, ever since it became law. But those are the activities that we have observed so far that we can say are dealing with this aspect of micro-targeting and disinformation.
Thank you, Francis. Just on that, I mean, you were mentioning those measures in place. Obviously, I hope to be optimistic on it, but do you think those will be effective in ensuring some kind of curbing of this micro-targeting? Or how effective do you think they can be, just to prevent the specific targeting for individuals?
I think once the Office of Data Protection Commissioner gets capacity, because most of these issues can say fall even under the realm of criminal law, and also our purpose limitation law doesn't stop you from, even for next year, once, let's say, the commission has capacity to bring an action against the perpetrators, because it's easy to know them based on the name, because there's a purpose that the communication or the messaging seeks to serve. So some of them contain the name of the vendor or the CSP, the content service provider who was engaged in that messaging. Some of them, it's the candidates themselves. So even later on, once now, you can lodge a complaint now, or even later on after the elections. We just hope that there will be action once the commission gets capacity, because they're still in the hiring process and setting up the office.
Thank you very much, Francis. Nelly, I just want to pose a question to you. You mentioned some of the initiatives that Amnesty International was involved in. What other initiatives is Amnesty engaged in to advance civic space rights and ensure participation in the elections? In addition to that, how can citizens in Kenya get involved within this space?
So yeah, I'm gonna touch a little bit on what Alexander was asking as well. So I do agree with what Catherine put forward in terms of the big tech companies. They have been trying, and they have genuinely, come forth and they're trying to engage civil society organization. But in addition, they also did make an effort to try and meet human rights defenders and teach them how to protect themselves online when they had a session for a week. So I felt like that was a good step forward in their way of, identifying and listening that, human rights defenders get targeted a lot during elections, and for them to be able to create a space where they can discuss how they can protect themselves online was a great aspect. So that's just one of the a step further that they took. So it's important. I just wanted to put that across so that it's important that we recognize that even though we're not where we want to be with the big tech companies, there are still some strides that we can kind of identify. Yes, we are mostly in terms of what we've been doing. I touched a lot on this previously when I was giving my presentation, but what I can say is that we are really trying to utilize our partnerships as well. So collectively doing something with our partners where we feel that there's a niche or gap is one of the ways that we're trying to at least have an ear everywhere with regards to what's happening during the election. So sitting in spaces such as AIRA and having conversations with colleagues and peers, just learning what they're doing from their side, from their end, and if there are any reports that they have as well, taking those into account, and also just learning from each other. So having learning circles, having conversations such as this are some of the ways that we're trying to not only prepare ourselves as Amnesty International, but also pass this information to the people that we work with and the communities so that they're aware of what they need to do towards the general elections. In terms of what can communities do, communities need to get more involved. What we've recognized through this whole process is that there's a lot of voter apathy, and it's quite sad that a lot of the youth do not want to participate in any governmental processes, including the elections. So what we need from individuals is just to actually participate in government processes. And how we've been trying to ensure that we're pushing and kind of advocating for this has been through holding those informal sessions such as the book club, where we're making it an interesting way to discuss government and the processes and of elections and things like that. Yeah, so that's how we've been diversifying, other than the straight up work that we're doing within Amnesty.
Thank you very much, Nelly. Very interesting indeed. So we come to an end now on the Q&A session with the panelists. We will now open the floor to the audience for our remaining 10 minutes. If you have a question for the panel or a particular panelist, please use either the raise your hand function at the bottom or the chat to signal. If you have in fact a question, you raise your hand, you can switch on your camera and then pose it to the panel in general or to an individual panelist. The floor is open if anyone has any questions. Okay, going once, twice, 3 times. Okay. So I have more questions to pose then if no one else wants to ask. Another question that I have that I just want to pose to Victor as well on the work that he was talking about. Victor, it was already raised in the chat and was raised by other panelists as well. But have you had any discussions as KickTernet with any tech companies on how to curb misinformation and disinformation? What has the results been? I've heard that you've had a discussion with some big social media platforms on the concerns. Have you reached any resolutions in these discussions?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think, KickTernet has worked with, Meta for some time, and we did early this year hold a session with around 60 to 70 different civil society actors to try and bring to their attention the concerns around the use of their platforms, especially around issues around, content moderation, misinformation, disinformation, and also, hate speech and other harmful content that continues to spread on the platforms, and trying to hold the platform to task to explain to, local stakeholders what measures it's taking. And, we did compile a report on discussions, and, we shared the same with them, and we are glad that today Meta, for example, has, put out a raft of measures that they've been trying to take from April to date about the number of posts they've taken down that constituted hate speech or violence or misinformation content. And we are glad that at least some action has been taken. That, one of the concerns was that they are not doing enough. They're not investing, within, in Kenya, countries like Kenya in the global south, to use their artificial intelligence tools and, to ensure that this content doesn't get to users, doesn't show up on the platforms. And so they had committed then that they're going to try to take measures to reduce the spread of the content, to take down content more quickly, because when it stays longer on the platform, then it reaches more people, and also to reduce the reach of some of of this content. And you can see from I've posted the message on the chat, and one of the things they're saying is that they are going to take measures to reduce the spread of content that can easily go viral, including even on WhatsApp. And they also are creating awareness, because they were challenged in terms of what can they do better, and they are putting some promoted adverts to inform people and educate people about what is misinformation and how to do fact checking, and also coming out to be more transparent about the numbers. And they've also posted a page which we can see the political advertisements that have been bought in Kenya, and also to restrict political advertising in Kenya, so that then people cannot take advantage. And also this transparency, just to see how much people are spending and who is actually investing in political ads. And at least now that information is available, and like Kate said, we need to see more of that for other platforms. We just also had discussions with Twitter last week, and they're also looking at what measures they can do during this period of the election. And already they have started taking some measures within the app to try and educate their users. But of course, more can be done by the platforms, and more can be done to educate the users, social media users, before, to stop, think, and check before they share, this viral content that they have not fact checked. So I think the environment is getting better, and the platforms are appreciating the need to engage with local stakeholders, because they really haven't made significant investments as they have, for example, in Europe or in the US. And the effects of them not taking action are much more grave, especially for countries like Kenya that we have elections in the coming weeks, and if they didn't do anything, then it would be highly responsible of them.
Yes, thank you, Victor. Victor, while I have you, I know that KickTernet has established an election observation mission that will focus on digital rights. Could you tell us more about this election observation mission?
Yes, so we have convened a group of election observers who who are going to be monitoring the technology used during the elections. So we're focusing on technology and also social media use. So we are looking at how the commission is using technology, how politicians are using technology and social media platforms. And we are monitoring on a daily basis, and we shall be developing a report of our findings. We're also engaging with other stakeholders and comparing notes about what is emerging, and also sharing this information with the stakeholders that are responsible. So we met, for example, with the IEBC a few days back, to highlight to them some of the key concerns that the public have. We've also met with the platforms on a number of occasions, and we're also going to be reaching out to political parties to ensure that, as they use, the networks, we are monitoring some of the risky uses and bringing it to their attention, and hopefully we are going to see a much more credible election in the process.
Thank you very much, Victor. I think it is important to establish that dialogue, that constant dialogue on the issues. As we are close to finishing off the session, I want to give each of the 4 panelists a minute just to provide a closing remark on the issues on digital rights and the election. So I think we can start off with you, Victor, and then we can move on to Catherine, and then Francis, and then Nelly, just to give a closing observation.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just to thank AIRA for hosting this dialogue. It is important for us to continue engaging and talking. I think by sharing ideas is how we can generate more knowledge and awareness on these critical issues. And also just to mention that it's important, let's continue being vigilant and monitoring and sharing the information. And hopefully we'll be able to turn the tide of the harmful effects that are coming, and continue to harness the power of technology to advance human rights in Kenya and across the continent. Thank you.
Catherine?
Well, for me, it would be first to thank all of our participants for listening until the end, but also to say that I think there's importance in sharing notes and just working together to sort of learn from each other, and I hope that we can do that even beyond or during the election. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Francis, we move on to you.
I'd like to thank AIRA for hosting this session, and for us, for the rest of the participants. My call to action is basically beware, or that everything you see online is probably not true, or probably is targeted at you. So just beware and consider a second opinion before acting.
Thank you very much, Francis. We move on to Nelly.
Thank you all so much for sparing time to be here. It's been great. It's been a great learning session. Thank you so much, AIRA, for hosting this as well. My finishing note is that I know there are a couple of elections that are, going to be coming up within the African continent. I hope that we're able to pass this on so that they're able to be prepared as well and have a little bit more insight than what we went into at the beginning of the year. So I hope that this is, something that we can use and map out for another African country to be more prepared. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nelly. We are out of time. I want to thank our panelists today and the discussants for their participation. And thank you, of course, to the audience for attending this AIRA Talks. In conclusion, learn more by following AIRA on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And as I said, by visiting our website at aira.africa. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day further. Goodbye.